Hi, Dawn the Stitching Coach here. In today's video, I'm going to demonstrate how to make half square triangles multiples at a time. But first, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell below so you don't miss a single video. Also, in the description below, there are helpful resources for today's topic. Let's get over to the cutting table. If you plan to make a quilt with squares made of triangles, also known as half square triangles, or HST for short, you'll love these shortcuts. Quilt blocks, such as the bear claw, can take hundreds of half square triangles. Start by trimming the fabric to a square. See resources in the description below for math formulas to cut the correct size for your quilt. Now, let's make 2 half square triangles at a time. With right sides or pretty sides together, put 2 squares together and mark a line down the center of one diagonal. Use whatever tool helps make a long, solid, straight line from one diagonal to the other, like so. You're going to sew a 1/4 inch on each side of the mark. Then cut on the mark. Let's take this to your machine. First, you want to lower your presser foot, then lower your needle. Make sure to lift your presser foot and then insert the fabric, bumping the fabric right up against the needle. Also, lining up, if you have a 1/4 inch foot, line up the mark with the mark that's on the fabric. To begin, we're going to make sure that we have a 1/4 inch on either side. If you want to mark your 1/4 inch, you can, but it's not necessary if you have a 1/4 inch foot. Next, we're going to take the 2 threads and hold them together, and we're going to sew for 3 steps. 1, 2, 3. Now we're going to push that to the back and continue sewing. Make sure you always leave your needle in the fabric. Continue sewing along the line until you reach the end of the fabric. Once you reach the end of the fabric, stop with the needle in the machine, pivot. Now let's check to make sure our seam is the right size. Take your seam gauge and match it up. Yep, looks good. Now, just as before, oh, wait, one more time. Let's check one more place. It's always good to check so that in case you have to take out a seam, this is a good point to do that. Now, again, lower your presser foot, lining up the mark on the fabric with the mark on your presser foot, and start sewing. Keep sewing until you get to the end of the fabric and sew off the edge of the fabric. Now that you've reached the end of the seam, go ahead and give it one last check and then clip your threads and pause here if you want to give it a try. Our next square, again, right sides together, line your squares up, and this time, instead of using a ruler, we're going to just sew across all 4 edges. You can mark this if you want, but it's not necessary if you have a 1/4 inch foot. Let's take it to the machine. Now, again, we're going to be sewing across all 4 edges. I'm going to start just off the edge, not in the corner. Again, holding the 2 threads, we're going to sew 3 steps, and then we're going to let those threads go and push them to the back. Now we're going to go all the way to the edge. If you don't know where a 1/4 inch is, you can mark it, or in this case, when you get close and you think you're getting close to it, stop and pivot your work to see if you're close enough. Again, it should be edge of foot, edge of fabric. If you have a 1/4 inch foot, it might be a little different. Not close enough. Let's try one more step. Yeah, that's good enough. Now we're going to go down this edge and do the same thing. Remember, don't sew over pins because you could break them, bend them, or even break your sewing machine needle. Let's continue down the side. Again, when you reach the edge, and if you're not sure, Stop with the needle in the fabric, pivot. Nope, let's go one more step. One more. Looks good. Again, remember, you're in control. If you need to adjust the fabric, do so. Remember, you don't have to push or pull, just guide. One more step. One more step. Perfect. Now we're at the last corner. We're going to get close, line it up. One more step. Let's pivot, and we're going to line it up and sew over just by a few steps to close that gap. Remember, check your seam, clip your threads. This method gives you 4 half square triangles at a time. Now pause and take this method for a spin. In our next method, this is going to give you one of 2 ways to get 8 half square triangles at a time. In this method, we're going to draw an X on your square. Make sure to make the marks clear and visible. This is the left leaning part of the X. Next, we'll rotate the fabric and we'll do the right leaning part of the X. Again, if you feel more comfortable, you can always mark the 1/4 inch on either side of this mark. Now let's take it to the machine. In this method, we're going to sew on either side of the X that we made. First, line up your presser foot to the right side of the left leaning X. Again, hold both the bobbin and the top thread for 3 steps, then move it to the back. This prevents a bird nest from the bottom. Go ahead and sew all the way across and immediately make a U-turn and sew on the other side of this left leaning side of the X. If you want to conserve some of your thread, don't pull out a lot and make sure to check your seam. Again, line it up with your foot and proceed on the other side of the left leaning side of the X. Again, to conserve thread, we're not going to pull a large amount. We're just going to fold this corner of the fabric over so that we don't have to cut it and start all over from scratch. Again, lining up the presser foot to the right side of this mark, we're going to sew and carefully keep this folded and out of the way. When you get to the end, we're going to make another U-turn. This is our last turn, guys. Line up the mark with your presser foot, bump it up against the needle, and continue sewing off the edge of the fabric. All right, now it's your turn. Pause here and give it a try. On the last method, this also gives you 8 half square triangles at a time. In this one, we're going to draw a plus mark down the center of the fabric. So we'll start with the vertical. In this case, we're going to need to make sure that this is the halfway mark or it won't turn out correctly. So in this case, it's a 5.5 inch square, so I'm going to mark it at 2 5/8. I count over to the fifth mark, so that should be 5/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now I'm going to draw a vertical line down the center of the fabric. Now we'll rotate and we'll do the horizontal line. Again at 2 5/8. 2, 3, 4, 5. Line up the ruler. Make your mark. After we make the plus mark, we're now going to join the diagonals in the corners to make a diamond shape. Make sure your lines go all the way to the end and join those lines on the diagonal of every corner. Rotate and join. Oh, let's finish this line and join. Rotate, and let's do that again. Once you have your diamond done, we're now going to take it back to the machine and I'll show you how this one's going to get sewn. We're going to be doing 1/4 inch on either side of the diagonals only. There's your diamond, there's your plus. Let's take this to the machine. So again, we're only going to be sewing the diamond part of the marks that you made. So first, line up the presser foot with the outside of the diamond. And we're going to do 1/4 inch on either side. Again, holding your threads together for 3 steps, proceed to sew and then move those threads to the back. We're going to sew off the edge, take out our pin, make a U-turn, and continue along the outside of the diamond. Remember guys, if you need to adjust your fabric, please do so. Otherwise you won't have an accurate seam allowance. This is our last turn. Each time you turn, remember to line it up and bump the fabric up against the needle. Once we've done the outside of the diamond, we're now going to do the inside of the diamond. We're going to lift the needle and put the presser foot on the inside of the diamond. I'm going in just a little bit and we'll join this and turn the corner at the very end. When you get to the plus mark, stop with the needle on the plus mark, pivot and rotate and continue along the inside of the diamond. Each time you get to the plus mark, you want to stop with the needle on the plus mark and pivot. This is our last turn. When we get to the end, again, pivoting at the plus mark, we're going to pivot and then join and overlap our sewing to close the gap. Now, lift the needle, take it out, clip your threads, and now let's go back to the cutting board. So, in the first method, we want 2 half-square triangles. So we're going to check our seam gauge, and it looks like we're pretty solid. So now we're going to cut straight down the middle to give us 2 half-square triangles. So lining it up on the 1/4 inch, it should line up with the mark in the middle. Cut on the mark all the way to the end. And then once you've cut, separate, and now we're going to press these out. Oops, I should have changed my rotary cutter blade. Remember guys, you want to cut straight down, not at an angle. And it helps to have no slip markers on your rulers. Okay, we have 2 half square triangles. So now we're going to press this open. You usually want to press to the darker part of the fabric. So let's hold this for 5 seconds and warm it up. Warming up that seam will allow this to lay flatter. Next, we're going to lay the iron right on the crease, bump it up against that fold. Remember, the side of the iron is just as hot as the bottom. Remember, you don't need to push and smear, just make sure you give it a good solid press. Pressing ensures that you don't stretch the block out of shape. Now we have 2 half square triangles. In the next method, we're now going to cut this into 4 half square triangles. Our first cut is going to be diagonal, like an X. So let's do the left leaning side first. With your ruler, lay it down and cut at a diagonal, straight across the diagonal, just like we marked it with an X on the other method. Now we're going to cut again like an X. And this should give us 4 half square triangles. Again, remember to push down on your rotary cutter. Don't push at an angle. And make sure you change your blades often. One, 2, and 3, 4. So now let's press this out. Again, picking the darker of the 2, we're going to press to the dark side. So we're going to hold it down for 5 seconds. And then that warms it up so that we can press it out. Sometimes finger pressing actually helps make it go smoother, but this is the side we're going to do. Let's do the dark side. Press that down. Again, we're pressing, not smearing. We don't want to block this into a different shape. We still want it to be square. So hold that down for 5 seconds. Press it. And there you have it. 4 half square triangles. Starching also really helps. In the next method, we have 8 at a time. So we're going to cut on the X, and then we're going to cut those in half again. So taking your ruler and your rotary cutter, first with the left leaning X, line your ruler up so that you cut on the mark. We're now going to rotate and cut it on the other side. Oops, still hanging on. Now let's do the other side. Keeping them together, making sure they line up, cut across on the other side of the X. Once you have these separated, we're now going to cut these triangles in half once more. Using a ruler or a seam gauge, line up your ruler marks at the bottom of the triangle and at the top of the triangle. This ensures you're going to get it exactly halfway. Now we have 2 half square triangles. And now we're going to keep repeating this with each of the triangles, cutting each one in half once more. Line it up at the bottom, line it up at the top, and cut. Line it up. Measure twice, cut once, folks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. One more. And this makes 8. Now that we have these cut, we're going to press this out. We're going to pick the darker of the 2 purples. And just as we did before, we're going to warm it up, get it ready for pressing out, and then finish pressing for a nice, even, flat seam. This is a good time to do a dry iron and not a steam iron, as you might need to put your fingers near the iron. And there you have it. 8 half square triangles from 1 square. In our last method, with the diamond and the plus, we're now going to cut the plus and then we're going to cut the diagonals. Starting with the plus, we're going to cut on the vertical right on the mark that we made. If you want, line up your ruler to help you get a straight line. Without moving it too much, keeping it together, we're now going to do the other part of the plus mark. Straight across. And now we're going to cut these triangles in half once more, similar to the method we just did before. But now we have squares that we're going to cut in half. Line up your ruler or your seam gauge to see if your seams are correct. If any are not correct and you may have gotten off, you can always take it back under your machine and rip out that seam. This one looks a little off. So what we'll do is we'll cut this in half right in the middle on the diagonal, and we'll take the other that's off and redo it later. But remember, make sure you cut it exactly in half, folks. See? Off just a little. That's okay. Cutting it in the middle gives us enough wiggle room to go back and redo that seam. Repeat this procedure with each square until each square has now become half square triangles. Once all of your squares are cut in half, you now have 8 half square triangles. Remember to press them open to the dark side, and there you have it. Now you're ready to practice half square triangles and piece quilt blocks together quickly. Remember, subscribe, and don't miss my next video when I show you how to get started hand embroidering. See you next time.